In a galaxy where power and strength reign, one human soldier defies the odds, surviving an impossible trial on an alien world facing monsters, deadly terrain, and unimaginable dangers. But when the ruthless queen of the Zeresian Empire challenges him, she never expected him to not only survive, but to change everything, sparking a bond that will shatter the rules of the galaxy. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to this channel and show your support by liking the video. Now let's jump into the story. In the Grand Hall of the Zeresian Empire, a palace made of gleaming black stone and radiant crystal, a massive crowd gathered to witness an event that would go down in history. The hall was filled with towering beings from across the galaxy, warriors with biceps like boulders, wise elders with faces that seemed carved from rock, and nobles draped in regal garments that shimmered with the light of distant stars. Floating seats hovered above the ground, where each one perched its occupant like a bird on a branch, all eyes fixed on the stage in the center of the room. There, standing alone and shackled, was a single human Marcus, a soldier from Earth. His clothes were torn, his body bloodied from battles fought against the Zeresian forces, and his face smeared with dirt. Yet, despite his outward appearance, his eyes were alive with fire, a quiet defiance that no one in the room had expected. At the center of the Grand Hall, seated upon a throne that seemed to glow with an eerie energy, sat Queen Kelia, the ruler of the Zeresian Empire. She was a creature of immense power, tall and imposing, easily standing over 8 feet. Her violet eyes glimmered like 2 stars, cold and unfeeling, while her armor pulsed with energy, seemingly alive with its own pulse. Her hair, as dark as a moonless night, cascaded down her back, flowing like a river of shadows. With a voice that could command galaxies to bow, she looked down upon Marcus from her towering throne, the weight of her gaze heavy as 1,000 suns. "So this is the human?" she asked, her voice calm but filled with an edge that could cut through. "Metal, the one who dared challenge my armies?" The room erupted in laughter, the sound echoing off the stone walls. The audience, all accustomed to the power of the Zeresian military, found the idea of one human defying them utterly absurd. And yet, Marcus remained unmoving, his gaze locked with the Queen's, not a trace of fear in his eyes. He had fought too many battles and witnessed too much pain to be afraid of this alien queen. No matter how terrifying she appeared, Kelia stood slowly, her movements deliberate and graceful, like a predator preparing to strike. She descended the steps from her throne, her towering form casting a long shadow over Marcus. The room fell silent as she approached, her presence undeniable, filling every corner of the hall with an almost suffocating weight. She stopped just inches from Marcus, towering over him like a mountain. The air between them seemed to hum with tension, thick with the promise of something dangerous. Her voice dropped to a soft, dangerous whisper. "They say humans are clever." Kelia continued, her eyes narrowing slightly. "They say you can survive anything. Tell me, Earthling, why should I not crush you where you stand? Why should I not end your miserable existence right now?" Marcus didn't flinch, didn't look away. He stood tall despite his bruised body, meeting the Queen's gaze with a confidence that came from knowing he had already been through hell. His smile was small but unyielding, a spark of humor in his dark eyes. "Because," he said, his voice steady and calm, "I'm far too charming to kill." The response hung in the air, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, as though the floodgates had opened, laughter rippled through the room. The guards chuckled, the nobles snickered, and even Kelia, with her stoic demeanor, allowed a small laugh to escape her lips. It was the last thing anyone had expected to hear from the human. Here he was, covered in blood and dirt, tied up like an animal, and yet he had the audacity to make a joke at the Queen's expense. Her sharp eyes glinted with amusement, but there was also something else there, something that hadn't been there before: curiosity. "You are bold," Kelia said, her voice still amused, though the sharpness never left. "Tell me, what do you think of Zyresian women?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "The ones who are tall, scary, and could probably snap me in half." He raised an eyebrow. "I think they're beautiful, but I doubt any of them would want to breed with a human like me." Another burst of laughter echoed through the hall, but this time it was tinged with something else, unease. No one expected the human to speak so casually about something so sacred to the Zyresians. The word breed hung in the air like a sword ready to fall, and the crowd grew silent again, unsure of what to make of this strange human and his boldness. Kelya's eyes flashed, a dangerous light filling them. "You dare speak of royal breeding so lightly?" she asked, her tone no longer amused but intrigued. "Tell me, Earthling, what if I offered you a chance?" Marcus shrugged nonchalantly. "Well, if I had the chance, I'd make sure she enjoyed it," he said, his grin never faltering. The room fell utterly still. No one had expected this, least of all the queen. Kelya's eyes glowed a little brighter, but rather than anger, there was something deeper, something that drew her in. She stepped back, studying Marcus carefully. The silence stretched on until finally she spoke, her voice a low, dangerous murmur. "You are an interesting little human," Kelya said, her lips curling into a smile that was anything but friendly. "You have a sense of humor I didn't expect. I will accept your challenge. Survive the trial of thorns, Earthling, and perhaps you will prove yourself worthy of my attention." With a snap of her fingers, the guards moved forward, grabbing Marcus roughly by the arms and pulling him away. The crowd erupted into whispers, their laughter fading as they speculated on how long the human would survive in the trial. The Trial of Thorns was a test of survival, a place where even the strongest beings often perished. It was meant to break the spirit, to crush anyone foolish enough to enter. And yet, as Marcus was dragged away, he couldn't help but think back to the Queen's smile. There was something in it, something that stirred a strange feeling deep inside him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. As the palace doors closed behind him, Marcus couldn't help but mutter to himself, "Well, this joke really got out of hand." The Trial of Thorns was no ordinary test. It was a cruel game of survival designed by the Zyresian Empire to break those who dared to challenge their might. It was held on a desolate moon, a place where the air was thin, the land barren, and the wildlife vicious. The surface was covered in jagged rocks and thick, twisted vines that seemed to breathe with a life of their own. To most, the Trial of Thorns was a death sentence, a place where even the strongest and most skilled creatures from across the galaxy had been sent to perish. And now, Marcus, an Earth soldier with nothing but his wits and his will to survive, was being thrown into the heart of it. As he was dropped onto the rocky ground, the only sound that greeted him was the eerie whistle of the wind, carrying with it the scent of alien flora and the promise of danger. His body ached from the brutal battles he'd fought leading up to this moment, and the fall had left him winded. His arm was sore, and one of his ribs might be cracked. His hands were still bound tightly behind his back, but that didn't matter. He had been trained to survive in the most hostile conditions, and he wasn't about to let this moon break him. Not now. The dropship that had brought him here vanished into the clouds, leaving only silence in its wake. Above him, the twin moons of the planet glowed ominously, casting long shadows across the cracked, uneven landscape. He had no weapons, no supplies, nothing but his mind, his instincts, and the raw determination that had kept him alive for this long. He took a deep breath and surveyed his surroundings. The land was alien, nothing like the forests and fields of Earth. Tall, twisted trees with black bark towered over him, and the ground was littered with patches of glowing blue grass that seemed to pulse with strange energy. The air was thick with the sounds of distant growls, clicks, and shrill cries. Something was out there, and it was watching him. With no choice but to move forward, Marcus began his slow trek across the barren moon. His eyes scanned the terrain, noting the subtle signs of danger. The air was thick with the scent of something unnatural, and the distant sounds grew louder as he continued. He kept his steps light, careful to avoid making too much noise. Knowing that anything could be lurking in the shadows, hours passed, and the dangers of the trial began to reveal themselves. Marcus encountered a nest of six-legged reptilian creatures, their eyes glowing a fierce yellow in the dark. He could hear the rustling of their bodies as they skittered across the ground, hunting for food. If they smelled him, he'd be dead. Before he had a chance to fight back. Thinking quickly, Marcus grabbed a handful of blue fruit from a nearby bush and crushed it in his hands, using the juice to mask his scent. Slowly, he moved around the nest, using the trees for cover. The creatures didn't notice him as he passed, and he breathed a sigh of relief, but he couldn't afford to rest. The trial of thorns was relentless. Later, Marcus came across a sharp cliff face. Looking up, he realized the only way forward was to climb. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his trembling hands, and began his ascent. The rocks were slick, and the cliff was steep, but Marcus was determined. He climbed with the strength of someone who had nothing to lose, using every bit of knowledge he had about survival. When his hands began to slip, he found new footholds and pushed himself higher. With each move, he fought not just the rocks and the harsh environment, but also the exhaustion that threatened to take him down. By the time he reached the top, his hands were raw, his body sore, and his breath ragged. But he had made it. And there, on the other side, waiting for him, was something far worse than just a difficult climb. The ground trembled beneath his feet, and a low, rumbling growl echoed through the air. He turned slowly, his heart racing. From the shadows, a massive, venomous creature emerged, its eyes glowing a fierce red as it stalked toward him, its mouth dripping with poison. The creature was enormous, at least 10 feet tall, with spikes running down its back and claws that could tear through stone. It was fast, deadly, and relentless. And Marcus had no weapons. His instincts kicked in. He grabbed a jagged shard of alien glass from the ground and held it in front of him, though he knew it would do little to stop the beast. The creature lunged at him, its mouth open wide, but Marcus was faster. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the snap of its jaws. With no time to think, he scrambled to his feet and plunged the shard into the creature's soft underbelly. It roared in pain, but the blow was not enough to stop it. Marcus was on the move again, his legs carrying him in a blur of motion. He had no choice but to fight. His survival depended on it. He darted between rocks, using the terrain to his advantage. When the creature lunged again, Marcus rolled under it, narrowly avoiding its jaws as it crashed into the ground behind him. He grabbed another shard of glass and, with a swift motion, thrust it into the creature's throat. The monster gurgled and collapsed, its massive body twitching before going still. Marcus fell to his knees, breathing hard, his body shaking. From the adrenaline, he had done it. He had survived the impossible, but the victory felt hollow. He was alone, wounded, and exhausted. And worse yet, he knew that the trial of thorns was far from over. Back in the Zaresian palace, Queen Kelia watched the entire scene unfold on her screens, her violet eyes glued to display. Her council begged her to return to her royal duties. But Kelia refused. She was transfixed by the human survival, amazed by his cleverness, his strength, and his refusal to die. He was like no other creature she had seen before. As the hours passed and Marcus continued to defy the odds, Kelia's respect for him grew. This human wasn't just a joke anymore. He was something else entirely. In the quiet of her chamber, the queen watched, knowing that something had changed. This trial was no longer just about testing a human. It was about witnessing something greater. Something worth fighting for. As the days dragged on, Marcus continued to survive in the trial of thorns, a feat that no one had expected. The Zaresian palace was still and quiet, Yet high above, in her private chamber, Queen Kellia's violet eyes never left the screen that displayed the human's every move. It was the first time in her life that she had been so engrossed in the struggle of another being. The trial was meant to be deadly, a place where only the strongest survived. Yet, Marcus, with his earthborn resilience, defied every expectation. The queen had seen many creatures sent to die in this arena: giant beasts, fierce warriors, and cunning aliens. But none had lasted as long as Marcus. The hours stretched into days, and with each passing moment, Marcus continued to prove that he was more than just a joke. Kellia watched as he skillfully avoided predators, his every move a calculated decision to ensure his survival. At one point, Marcus had come across a massive nest of six-legged lizard-like creatures. He had no weapons, no protection, and the only way out was through. Instead of panicking, he used his wits. He found some strange blue fruit that grew nearby, crushed it in his hands, and rubbed the pulp all over his body, masking his scent. The creatures, with their sharp, predatory instincts, passed by him without even noticing. Kellia, watching from her high tower, couldn't help but marvel at his resourcefulness. But it wasn't just his cleverness that fascinated her. It was his spirit. Marcus didn't cower or beg for mercy, as so many others had. He never looked defeated, even when his body was clearly battered and exhausted. As the days wore on, Kellia saw something shift within him. He was no longer simply trying to survive, he was learning. Each time he faced a new challenge, he grew stronger, more confident, more capable. Even the creatures that had once seemed insurmountable were now mere obstacles for him to overcome. On the third day, he encountered a giant venom-spitting crawler, its long, spindly legs moving like deadly knives in the dark. It was faster than anything Marcus had encountered before, but he didn't panic. He hid in the trees, waiting for the right moment to strike. He used mud to cover his body, disguising his scent, and then fashioned a crude spear from broken rocks and bone. When the creature came close, Marcus threw the spear, piercing the crawler's underbelly. It screeched in pain but didn't fall. Instead, it lunged at him, its sharp teeth inches from his face. With a quick roll, Marcus dove to the side, grabbing a shard of alien glass and plunging it into the creature's throat. It went down with a final roar. In the surveillance chamber, Kellia leaned forward, her eyes wide with surprise. She had never seen anything like this before. No other creature had shown such tenacity, such determination. The guards standing behind her whispered in awe, "He learns." Kellia nodded silently, her eyes never leaving the screen. For the first time, she felt a sense of respect for the human. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't just a prey animal. By the fifth day, Marcus was no longer simply surviving. He had become a true contender in the Trial of Thorns. Kellia could see it now. His body was battered, covered in cuts and bruises, but his eyes still held a glimmer of life. He had begun to understand the land around him, the dangers, the rhythms of the creatures that inhabited it. The moon itself was an enemy, but Marcus was learning how to fight it. He had crafted a shelter from the twisted trees, made fire without tools, and even started to recognize the warning signs of danger before it struck. But then, something happened that Kellia hadn't anticipated. On the sixth day, Marcus encountered a large pool of red water in a clearing. He was desperate for water, his throat dry, his body weakening from exhaustion. As he bent down to drink, his instincts flared. He hesitated, sensing that something was wrong. He waited. A small creature, no bigger than a rodent, stepped into the pool and instantly turned to stone. Marcus stepped back quickly, realizing that the water was poisoned. If he had drunk from it, it would have been the end of him. Kellia's interest deepened. She had been watching him for days, and now she could see that his instincts were no longer just based on survival. He was becoming something more. Something she hadn't expected. A human, capable of learning, adapting, and thriving in the face of impossible odds. But Marcus wasn't done yet. His greatest challenge still lay ahead. As the day wore on, the ground beneath him began to tremble. A massive creature emerged. From the trees, a beast that Kellia herself had used in the past to deal with war criminals. The creature was 12 feet tall, covered in bone armor, with claws that could rip through steel and fangs dripping with black venom. It was the apex predator of the moon, a creature that had never been defeated. As the beast roared and charged toward him, Marcus didn't run. He didn't have the luxury of running. Instead, he grabbed his makeshift spear and held it firm. The battle was fierce. The creature was fast and powerful, but Marcus was quick. He dodged its attacks, narrowly avoiding its deadly claws, and finally, with a well-aimed thrust, he drove the spear deep into the creature's neck. The beast fell to the ground with a mighty thud, and Marcus dropped to his knees, exhausted and covered in blood. He had done it. He had killed the apex predator. Back in the palace, Kellia stood motionless, her heart pounding in her chest. No one had ever killed the apex. Not even the strongest warriors in her empire had dared to face it. Yet Marcus had done it. She felt a strange flutter in her chest, something she couldn't quite name. It was more than admiration. It was respect. This human, this earthling, had managed to accomplish the impossible. Call off the test, one of her advisors said, his voice shaky with disbelief. He's just a human. Kellia raised her hand, silencing him. Let him fight, she said, her voice calm but filled with something new. Let him show me what he's made of. As the trial continued, Kellia found herself watching with an intensity she had never felt before. She had seen the rise and fall of empires, the collapse of armies, and the fall of countless creatures. But Marcus, this small human, had done something that none of them had expected. He had earned her respect. And in some strange way, he had begun to earn something more, a place in her thoughts that no one else had ever occupied. Asterisk. The trial of thorns had been a test of survival like no other. For days, Marcus had fought against the unforgiving landscape of the desolate moon, facing down monstrous creatures and harsh elements that would have crushed any ordinary being. Yet, against all odds, he had endured. His body was battered and bruised, but his spirit remained unbroken. Queen Kellia had watched every moment of his struggle from her chamber in the palace, her violet eyes fixed on the screens that showed his every move. What began as amusement and curiosity slowly transformed into something deeper: respect. For the first time, she found herself admiring this human, a creature she had once dismissed as nothing more than a mere joke. But Kellia was not one to let emotions sway her decisions. She was the ruler of an empire, a queen whose word was law. Her people demanded strength, not sentimentality. Yet, as she watched Marcus stand against the odds, she couldn't help but feel that something had shifted. Something in her, something she couldn't name, had begun to change. On the seventh day, Marcus had done the impossible. He had killed the apex predator, a creature feared by even the mightiest warriors of her empire. No one, not even Kellia herself, had ever managed to defeat the beast. And yet, this human, this earthling, had done it with nothing but his resourcefulness, his wit, and a sheer will to survive. Kellia stood in her chamber, staring at the screen, her mind racing. The trial had been meant to break him, to prove, once and for all, that no human could withstand the might of the Zeresian Empire. But Marcus had proven them wrong. He had survived. As the trial came to a close, Kellia knew that Marcus had earned something more than just his life. He had earned her attention, her respect, and perhaps something even more dangerous, her curiosity. She had spent her entire life ruling with an iron fist, commanding armies, and making decisions based on logic and power. But Marcus had made her question everything she thought she knew. His bravery, his humor, his tenacity, these were qualities she had never expected from a human. And yet, They had made her see him as something more than just a prisoner. Kellia couldn't help but wonder what would happen if she brought Marcus back to the palace. What would he do now that he had survived the trial? Would he be content to live out the rest of his life in her empire? A trophy of sorts, a symbol of his victory. Or was there something more between them, something that neither of them could yet understand? Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of her guards. They informed her that Marcus was waiting in the holding chamber, his body weak but his gaze unwavering. Without saying a word, Kellia stood and left her chamber. As she walked through the palace, her mind was heavy with the weight of her decision. She had never allowed anyone to stand beside her, let alone challenge her in such a way. But Marcus had done that and more. He had made her see him not as a prisoner, but as an equal. When she entered the holding chamber, Marcus looked up at her. His face was pale, his body covered in bruises, but his eyes were the same as they had been during the trial, defiant, strong, and unyielding. Kellia couldn't help but feel a strange pull in her chest, something she had never experienced before. This human, who had survived everything the trial had thrown at him, was standing before her now, a symbol of his victory. But what did it mean for them? "I expected you to die," Kellia said, her voice softer than she intended. "I expected to laugh more," Marcus replied, his grin small but genuine. Kellia studied him for a moment, her violet eyes searching his face for any hint of fear or desperation. But all she saw was determination. "Do you still wish to bond with royalty?" she asked, her voice steady, but her heart betraying her curiosity. Marcus didn't hesitate. "I came here a joke," he said, his voice serious now. "But now I ask because something real happened out there. Something changed." Kellia's heart skipped a beat. She had always seen herself as a ruler first and a woman second. But now, standing before this human, she couldn't help but wonder if there was something more to life than power and control. Perhaps there was something worth more than the empire she had spent her life building. Without thinking, Kellia stepped closer to him. The air between them crackled with a strange energy, and for the first time in her life, she felt unsure of her place in the galaxy. "Prove it," she said, her voice soft but firm, not with words, but with loyalty. The words hung in the air like a promise, a challenge, and an invitation all at once. Marcus didn't speak, but his eyes met hers with a sincerity that made her heart race. He wasn't here to play games. He wasn't here to survive just for survival's sake. He was here for something more. And Kellia knew, in that moment, that she was no longer just a queen. She was a woman standing before a man who had shown her that there was more to life than just ruling with an iron fist. As the silence stretched on, Kellia made her decision. "Bring him back," she said to her guards, her voice quiet but filled with authority. They were shocked. "But my queen, he hasn't finished the trial." Kellia raised a hand, silencing them. "He has finished enough," she said. "Hours." Later, Marcus found himself back in the palace, his body weak but his mind sharp. He had been given clean clothes, his wounds tended to, but his eyes never left the queen's as he walked into the great hall. The nobles and courtiers stared in shock as he approached the throne, but Marcus didn't care. He had survived the trial of thorns, and now he stood before the queen, no longer just a prisoner, but something more, something that had the potential to change the fate of two worlds. Kellia stood, her expression unreadable. The tension in the room was palpable. "I expected you to die," she said again, her voice quieter now. "I expected to laugh more." Marcus replied with a grin. Kellia studied him for a long moment, and then, for the first time in her life, she did something she had never done before. She stepped forward, her voice low but sincere. "Prove it. Not with words, but with actions. Show me that something real has happened." And in that moment, the bond between them was forged, a bond that would transcend the stars, the empires, and everything they had once believed. It was a bond built not on power, but on something far more powerful, trust, respect, and love. Asterisk.